My name is Mike Norton-Griffiths. I've been here in East Africa in general, Kenya in particular, for some 45 years. I started my career here as a wildlife biologist with the Serengeti Research Institute down in Tanzania, and then moved up here to Kenya. And now I'm a practitioner of the dismal science. I look at land use economics, and I'm particularly interested in the economics of conservation, and especially the difference in economic returns to landowners from agricultural production, livestock production, and wildlife production. Now, I think Kenya shows a textbook example of what happens to a natural resource base when you remove its economic viability. 30 years ago, Kenya had a most extraordinary wildlife conservation policy, very, very broad-based, from strict protection in the national parks and reserves, right through to ranching and cropping and live capture and sales, and of course including sport hunting. And there were all the value-added industries as well, the tanning, taxidermy, curios, all these sorts of things. And then in 1977, all consumptive use of wildlife was banned in Kenya, and the only use you could make of it was through tourism. Now, the extraordinary thing was, in 1977, when this dramatic change in conservation policy occurred, there was also set up something called the Kenya Rangeland Ecological Monitoring Unit, and I was involved with that. I was training all the aerial survey crews. And miraculously, from this major change in policy to today, we also had a way of monitoring the impact of the policy. And year by year by year, CREMU as it was called, it counted livestock and wildlife across all the rangelands of Kenya, the parks, the rangeland areas, the private lands. And year by year by year, we started to see that Kenya was hemorrhaging wildlife. The average rate over the last 35 years has been 4.5% per annum loss. We have now lost 80% of the wildlife that we had, say, 35 years ago. And many of us think that that is strongly correlated, not 100%, but strongly correlated with this reduction in the economic value of wildlife to landowners. Now, it's very interesting to compare Kenya with Southern Africa, and especially South Africa. In the mid-70s, Kenya and South Africa had roughly the same number of wildlife, somewhere between 1 million and 1.5 million. Over the next 35 years, Kenya went to full protectionism, no consumptive use of any sort, only tourism. South Africa went the other way, and in De Soto's terms, wildlife became fully fungible, just like livestock. You could trade them, you could buy them, you could sell them, you could eat them, you could do whatever you wanted with them. 35 years later, Kenya has lost 80% of its wildlife. In South Africa, from 1.5 million, whatever it was, there are now over 20 million head of wildlife, and increasing still. There's something like 20,000 wildlife ranches where people, some of them they hunt on them, some is just tourism, some is meat production, on some they just grow wildlife to sell to other ranches. You can buy wildlife from national parks. The whole thing is a viable economic industry, and it's vast in South Africa. Here in Kenya, sadly, we've restricted the economic returns to wildlife, and we've seen wildlife go.